Almost every runner at some point struggles with motivation. And although I obviously love running, if I'm completely honest, running done wrong can sometimes be pretty boring. But here's something interesting. Some of the most addictive games in the world are built around a few very simple psychological tricks. And studies show that when you apply these same kind of principles to training, something really cool happens. You suddenly become more motivated, you stick to your training more consistently, and as a result, of course, you become a better runner. When I started researching this, it actually became really clear to me that many of the most consistent and successful runners are already doing this in many different ways, often without realizing it themselves. And in this video I'll show you how you can gamify your running and the 5 most powerful ways to do it. And also the big traps and real problems where gamifying your training can actually destroy your progress instead of improving it. The big reason motivation drops for so many runners is actually pretty simple. Running can lack a strong sort of feedback loop. In comparison, if you lift weights, you often see progress more quickly. You lift heavier weights just within weeks. But with running, it can take months before you really see and feel clear improvements. And most runs feel pretty similar, especially if you get into the habit of running at the same paces, the same routes. It basically all feels like the same with no progress. And one thing our human brains love is progress and rewards and challenges. And interestingly, if we go back in human history, running actually had a lot of these elements built into it. I mean, running was used for different practical things like hunting, delivering messages, simply moving between places. And there was always a clear goal and a clear reward. But modern running for just health reasons and fitness improvements can sometimes lack this important feedback loop. And that's where gamification can make a huge difference. Gamification in fitness and training is actually a well-studied concept. Several studies looking at physical activity interventions show that adding game elements like progress tracking, some competition element, and rewards can significantly increase your adherence to actually doing the exercise. For example, this study analyzed more than 2,500 fitness competitions and over 800,000 days of activity data. And they found that participants increased their activity by about 23% during competitions. And these larger reviews of gamified health interventions show similar results. When elements like points, progress tracking, and social competition are introduced, people really tend to exercise more. And there's also a psychological explanation for why this works. And it comes from something called self-determination theory. And this theory suggests that motivation increases when 3 basic needs are satisfied. Competence, basically feeling progress and improvement like we talked about, and challenge, having meaningful goals to you, and relatedness, simply social interaction and competition. And gamification activates all 3 of these at the same time. So in many ways, gamification is simply a way to hack your own motivation system because it taps into some very basic human psychology. Our brains are built to really want to see clear progress in what we're doing, overcome challenges, and interact or compete with others. Now, all of this sounds smart in theory, right? But how do you actually apply this to your running? Here are 5 simple ways to gamify your training. One simple way to turn your running into a natural feedback loop is through apps, and the biggest example here is probably Strava, that a lot of runners already use in their day-to-day training. Because suddenly you don't just come back from a run with no real feedback. Your run is automatically uploaded and immediately you can see your weekly progress and your total mileage, and you can get kudos from your friends even. So your training suddenly becomes something you track and validate, and every run gives you some sort of positive feedback. And again, this is a very powerful motivator. But as we'll get into later in this video, there are also some big traps and potential problems with all of this kind of gamification. But we'll get to that later. First, let's look at a few other simple ways to gamify your running. Another extremely powerful way of gamifying your running is through streaks. And these kind of daily running streaks have become very popular in the running world over the last few years. And once people get one rolling, they often really don't want to stop. And I have experience from this myself. I actually had a daily run streak myself for over 4 years. And I noticed that something interesting happens when the streak gets longer and longer. First, it simply becomes more and more important to yourself to keep it alive, but at the same time, you also build a very strong habit and identity around running at least a little bit every single day. And the only reason I actually stopped mine after my 4-year streak was that when my kids were very young, sleep deprivation and stress basically made me simply forget it one day. And once that streak is gone, honestly, that motivation to at least sneak in a little short run on busy days becomes less. And the psychology behind this is something called loss aversion. Once we have something valuable and identity driven, we humans really don't want to lose it. And again, although this can be great in many ways, there are also some big problems with this approach. But we'll get to that later. Another great way to gamify your running is to create simple missions. And these don't have to be big, crazy adventures or challenges. Even something simple like running to work can be a great mission. And in many ways that actually goes back to the root, as we talked about, of why humans run in the first place. To achieve a specific goal, not just increase fitness. I actually do this myself almost every workday, running back and forth with the kids to daycare, and it's honestly one of the easiest ways to make sure the training actually gets done. Because the motivation becomes very simple. You have a clear goal to get from point A to point B. Competition is probably the most powerful motivator in running and the most used one as well. Signing up for a race is one of the easiest ways to gamify your training. And there is a reason races are so popular and why people who have signed up for a race are much more likely to actually get their training done. Because the moment you sign up for a race, suddenly you have a clear goal. Maybe you want to run a certain time at this distance, or maybe you just want to finish your first full-length marathon. Either way, your training suddenly becomes preparation for something. And that changes everything when it comes to motivation, because once a race is on the calendar, every run starts to feel like a part of this larger mission. And racing itself, as all runners know, is probably the easiest way to push yourself harder than you would ever be able to do in training. And either you get the result you wanted that will give you more belief in your training, or you get extra motivation to do things different and come back stronger and try again. Before we dive into some of the traps and real problems with some of these ways of gamifying your running, let's talk about a great way to gamify something many runners struggle with: mobility work. Most runners know they should probably work on certain specific parts of their body. For me, it's mainly the hip flexors because of too much sitting. But it's not exactly the most exciting exercises to do, and this is where the sponsor of this video, GoWod, does a great job of gamifying mobility work. You start by doing a mobility test, and the app gives you a mobility score and builds a specific program based on your sport and your individual mobility limitations. And then you can track how the mobility scores improve over time and actually see how it changes over time. And I actually managed to improve my hip mobility thanks to using the GoVod app the last months. You also get to track all of your mobility work and see your progress there. And in each session there is this clear progress bar you simply follow until the session is finished. For me, this actually increased my motivation quite a lot to do this type of exercises. So if you want to check it out and start by doing a completely free mobility test to see where you're at, I leave a link in the description. Now let's talk about the big traps, because gamification can also backfire if it's done the wrong way. As I mentioned earlier, I think Strava is great in many ways. I use it myself all the time, but it can also lead to some really bad decisions. People want kudos, people want to show impressive runs to their friends, and I've seen this quite a lot with runners I worked with. Simply knowing the fact that the run will be directly uploaded from your watch to Strava afterwards can sometimes lead to not the best training decisions. For example, running a single run much longer than your current training really supports, which is a big injury risk, or the most common mistake in running training, simply running too fast, which looks good on Strava for that single session, but can ruin your continuity and destroy your long-term plans and training. Another thing I see quite often is people choosing only routes that make the activity look more impressive on Strava. Basically running only on completely flat roads where the pace will look more impressive, instead of running on trails or hills that might actually be better for the goals you're training for. But the kilometer or mile pace will look less impressive if you do it on just some hills. Personally, I actually don't have all my Strava activities public anymore. I share some of them, but not all, because even though I'd like to think that I'm strong mentally and don't care what people think, I know that just the thought of my watch uploading every single run to the whole world to see, it shouldn't influence what I'm doing, but I have a feeling that there's a high risk that thought in the back of my mind start influencing the training decisions I make during a session. Running streaks can also be really great for some people, but they can also push people to run when they shouldn't run. Maybe when they're sick or when they're dealing with an injury that you really shouldn't run on. And that's why I'm not the biggest fan of general running streaks. Ideally, it would be better to have something like a flexible streak. For example, I run every day or I train every day unless I'm sick or injured. I understand that doesn't sound as flashy, but it's probably a healthier long-term approach. And when it comes to one of the most powerful ways of gamifying running and the most popular one, running competitions, there is also a trap here. I mean, always chasing the next race can many times lead to bad decisions as well. Running races when your body simply isn't ready, or pushing through injuries, trying to force yourself into shape before this specific race date. And those kind of decisions often involve taking big risks that more often than not end up setting you back a lot instead of moving you forward. So one important mindset to have as a runner is accepting that you won't always get to the start line in the shape you dreamed of when you sign up for the race, and sometimes you won't get to the start line at all. And remember that that's completely fine and okay. Sometimes the smartest decisions is simply not starting the race at all. And the race might still have helped you in some ways to be more consistent with the training, although you didn't get to the race in the shape you wanted or didn't get there at all. So gamifying your running can be incredibly powerful to use actively, but only if you stay in control of the game and not the other way around. Thanks again to GoVod for sponsoring this video. If you want to check out the app, you can click here. Train smart, have fun, and I will see you in the next video.